Hey guys, I'm Russ, and this is going to be my coming out story. I started out thinking that after 30 plus years of passing since I first came out, that this would be a much easier process for me. But it's turning out to be a whole hell of a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be to make this video. And it's taken me a few days to build up the courage to finally do it. But here I am. I've been watching a lot of videos lately on YouTube, a lot of young people telling their coming out stories. And I have to give you guys credit for your bravery and your willingness to share your stories for the purpose of helping other people who might be struggling with their own. And I really enjoy listening to the stories of guys like Carson and Nate, Matt and Blue, Zach and Alistair, Panos, Phoenix, just to name a few. They're brave individuals who share their intimate lives so that others can see that life can be good. It can even be incredible. And I think people need to hear those stories to find the strength and the courage within themselves. But what I struggle to find are videos of guys much older than their early 30s telling their stories of what it was like to come out back then. I think people need to remember that. We wouldn't be where we are now if not for those who were there when. No one in my life, surprisingly enough, has ever asked me what my coming out story was. This is the first time I've told it in sequence. And honestly, even my closest friends don't know every detail. In a lot of ways, it's very much like the stories people tell today, but also in a lot of ways, it can be very different. It was the 80's when I came out, and there was still a lot of discrimination against being gay or lesbian back then. Really outright hatred and bullying that went on and went overlooked because the adults shared the same opinions and wouldn't intervene, even if it ended up sending somebody to the hospital. But I think my story really started back when I was probably around 7 years old. I had two older brothers, and as older brothers do in general, they would terrorize each other and me often. My oldest brother, who is 8 years older than I am, he had a best friend back then that lived about two doors down. The guy was blonde and incredibly handsome and had a pretty amazing body. Well, one day he and my brothers decided they were going to play a prank on me. My brother's friend hid in my closet where, being a little kid with an overactive imagination, I used to believe monsters lived. My brothers, they took me by the arms and legs and threatened to throw me in the closet and lock me in. And in the closet, my brother's friend was there in the dark, growling and making really scary noises. And I got a little freaked out, and I ended up biting my brother's hand, drawing blood. He turned around and smacked me in the nose and gave me a pretty bloody nose in return. Games kids play. But the game at that point had stopped, and while my oldest brother, tended to my middle brother's bleeding hand, my brother's friend took care of me and my nose. And the feeling that he gave me, that gentle giant, he was so calm and so comforting and just so tender. It was unbelievable. And in retrospect, I think I had a pretty big crush on him after that. But time went on, and we moved around a lot back then. We eventually made our way from California up to Washington State, where I was in middle school. And I was a pretty naive kid in middle school. I had some friends, Steve, Ben, and John, I believe were their names. I hung out with these guys pretty much all the time, and they were really good friends. But there was something about John that was just different from the rest of them. He was never exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, but he was nice and kind and cute and soft-spoken, and I just really liked him. And that's also right about the time the weirdness started. Um, I'd often hear Ben and Steve and John talk about different girls they liked. They talked about how they wanted to kiss them, touch them, hold them, stuff like that. And I was confused because the things that they were talking about wanting to do with these girls were the exact same things I found myself wanting to do with John. And I wasn't sure what was going on. I didn't know why I felt the way I did. I had no idea what it was at the time. And to keep from being different, possibly losing my friends, I kept my mouth shut through the rest of middle school. The crazy story is that long time later, I did a study abroad program in London, England. And while I was on that study abroad program, I was with a group of friends from school in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. And that place, if you've ever been there, it's pretty crazy, pretty crowded all the time, especially on the weekends at night. And it was packed with people. I mean, almost standing room only. And I was with my group, and we were walking along, and I happened to look up, and right in front of me was John, the same John from middle school, almost 20 years later. It was crazy. And I looked up, and I was like, oh my God, John. And he looks at me, and he's like, Ross, what's up? And about that time, somebody from my group grabs my hand and pulls me off in that direction. And I look back and somebody's got him, hauling him off in the other direction. And I never saw him again after that. Anyhow, toward the end of middle school, my middle brother, the one whose hand I bit when I was younger, he came out of the closet as gay. And sadly, I watched the absolute hell and grief he took in that process. Some was from my parents, but not nearly as much as he got from other people around him. It was sad. He caught so much hell. I remember him fearing for his life many times and having no real role models for coming out except the stereotypes we'd seen on TV. He ended up adopting those mannerisms as some sort of an attempt to fit in. And I remember looking at my brother and thinking I could never be like that. The ways my own socially twisted, manipulated mind at the time believed was so horrible. And I refused to accept that I might actually be gay. But as time went on, and eventually I ended up in high school, my parents had moved us out to the country where I attended a very small school in a rural community. I was coming into my teen years, and puberty only tended to amplify my sexual desires. And my focus fell on one of the guys in particular. He was an athlete, cute face, I mean, the whole works. But he was obviously straight too. But that didn't stop me. One weekend night, after consuming some very large quantities of alcohol, which I don't recommend, I called him up after a football game. And in some drunken, slurred stupor, I outed myself to him and told him I thought he was attractive. And I mean, at first I didn't even remember having that conversation with him, but the following Monday, all absolute hell broke loose. Every person in school knew exactly what had happened, and at that point there was pretty much no going back. The jokes and snickers and taunting and name calling were bad enough, but then the physical threats of violence and ganging up on me and pushing me around and shoving me and calling me names, it was pretty brutal. Those were the worst. And I remember toward the end of my stay there, one day after school, when almost everyone had already long gone, left for home, I guess, I headed to my car in the school parking lot, and one of the guys who was notorious for giving me shit approached me and started calling me a faggot and a freak and a bunch of other pretty mean names. And I honestly don't know exactly what happened at that point. I must have been so enraged that I blacked out, literally. When I came to, I had this guy on his back on the ground, and I was sitting in the middle of his chest, and I was punching him in the face over and over again. And I remember it took two teachers and his friend trying to pull me off of him, and not fully understanding where I was yet at that point, hadn't fully snapped back. I actually ended up taking a swing at one of the teachers. Not a move I recommend, by the way. Thank God I did not make contact with him. But naturally, the next thing I knew, I was in the principal's office, and I was being told that I was going to be paddled because back then, corporal punishment was still legal in schools. And I was still so pissed off and enraged and feeling violated because I felt like I was the victim and I was going to get punished for it. Then I told him, no, you're not going to paddle me. And of course, that only proceeded to make him even more angry. And he grabbed his paddle and he started to come toward me. And without even realizing what I had done, I reached out and I grabbed the paddle out of his hand and I hurled it out an open window. He was pissed. That, needless to say. Oh, and of course I followed it up with some stupid, immature, childish comment about how if he tried it again, I was going to use it on him instead, or something equally as insane. So that naturally resulted in a call home to my mom and dad saying, you better get here now. And by the time my mom and dad got there, the sheriff was always also sitting there as well. And they finally got out of me what happened, what I was going through, how things transpired. And the deputy told my parents that since I had never done anything like it before, that he was not going to arrest me, providing my parents took care of it. My parents turned around and told the principal that under no circumstances was I going to be paddled at that time or ever, and that they would deal with it at home. So we ended up accepting a 10-day suspension. It was pretty fortunate that it was after school hours and no one else saw it, and the principal and the student and his friend were able to keep the whole thing on the down low, which was just fine with me. And during that 10 days, my parents and I decided that it might be time for me to transfer to another high school in town. And please keep in mind, I say this very embarrassing part of my story of completely losing my noggin to hopefully serve as a cautionary tale, because no matter how hard life gets or how terrifying the idea of coming out can be, never suppress it to the point of anger and violence, because unless it's in self-defense for your life, violence definitely doesn't solve anything. And in fact, most of the time it tends to even make things worse in the end. Life sucked for months after that. I mean, I was depressed, I was withdrawn, I had suicidal thoughts in the back of my head pretty much every day. And so many times it seemed like from almost every direction I was told that I was condemned by God for what I was. And eventually I gave up and I became angry, thinking, fuck it. If God doesn't want me, then I don't want him either. And what better way to get back at God for making me gay than rejecting me for it, than to turn to the dark side. And I began to go down a path of Satan, demons, rituals, magic. I don't know, nowadays they may call it emo or something. Maybe not to this degree that I did it, but nonetheless. So after that only resulted in scaring people more. I mean, they already had heard the stories of my anger management issues, and now they're hearing about my doing magic and spooky stuff, and just resulted in scaring people off more. And it succeeded in isolating me even further from my friends who might have accepted me, and had I just trusted them with my secret. So many people out there struggle with themselves, feeling alone, filled with self-hatred, struggling, believing they aren't worthy of true happiness and success. The fact is, if any of us were not worthy of everything we desire in this life, then what I like to call the great creator would not have brought us into this world to begin with. When I say the great creator, it's because that's what I choose to call that universal force, the force that holds our molecules together in certain patterns, the force that keeps our hearts beating, and that our lungs breathing, and seeds in the ground growing. I'm part Native American, and the Native Americans called the great creator grandfather. Others might call it the universe or higher power or any number of names. Call it what you want. I mean, it's all the same. It's ridiculous that people have to be so petty these days as to argue what is essentially syntax, all referring to the same force. After all, the word water itself can't make you wet. So call it what you want. I mean, whatever feels right to you. It's what I recommend anyway. But when I went on to my second school, I met another one of my best friends. She was beautiful and smart. She always just seemed to get me no matter what. Sort of a yin to my yang, so to speak. And I spent the next couple of years just trying to lay low, trying to avoid the rumors that began to carry over from my old school, and trying to figure out who I was and where I fit in. And, spiritually, I couldn't believe that the creator I had known condemned others for their differences. I mean, I always thought, wasn't Jesus once an outcast too? Wasn't he condemned for who he was and what he believed? And in the end, no matter how much rejection I received or how much condemnation was thrown my way, no matter how absolutely alone I felt at the hands of others, my love for my creator and creator's love for me never stopped. I've never been a religious person. In fact, I go so far as to say that religion is for those who are afraid of going to hell, whereas spirituality, on the other hand, is for those of us who have already been there. So, coming to terms with my spirituality, finally, I grew strong enough to accept who I was. Unfortunately, during this time, I also fell in love. And I say fell in love because for the first time in my life to that point, I believed I honestly, truly was in love. He was one of the star quarterbacks of the football team. Go figure. Physically perfect. One of the kindest, gentlest people you could ever meet. Everybody loved him. He was just so cool. And when you looked him in the eyes, you could see just how big his heart was. He was just a good person. And he always treated me with dignity and respect. He never judged, he never bullied or spread rumors, even though I think he knew how I felt. Don't know for sure, but I think he did. All the while, the rumors spread from my old school to the new one, and I realized that it was inevitable that I was going to have to face it, and I was going to have to come out as gay. So I decided to tell my best friend, this girl. And I remember being so scared to tell her, terrified of what she was going to think and what she was going to say. And when the words finally came out of my mouth, it was like I was some bystander listening to someone else say it. And she looked at me kind of puzzled for a minute, kind of raised her hands and said, "And?" And I was stunned. I was like not expecting that reaction from her. And she broke the silence and said, "Yeah, I already knew that. What difference does it make?" I don't remember if I cried or not. I probably did. But I do remember telling her absolutely everything at that point. I mean, including my feelings for the football player. And after telling her and feeling good about it and feeling confident about it, I knew that I had to tell my family. I knew they already knew some of it because of what happened when they transferred me to the other school. But when I sat my mom down and I told her, she reassured me that she and my father both knew and that they loved me no matter what. It was a miracle. I believe having another son who had already come out made it a little easier transition for dealing with me when it was my turn. And I think it even led my mom to accept the idea that being gay is not a choice, that maybe it has a genetic quality to it when 2 out of 3 sons were gay. And she in turn told my father separately that I had finally admitted it. And of course, he came to me and said that he accepted me and loved me without hesitation. And I'm not saying my parents were perfect, what parents are. But I will definitely say, without a doubt, they did the best job they could do for us, and especially for me. And at least my childhood, that was pretty special. My parents are amazing. Unfortunately, they've both passed on many years now. In the meantime, I didn't deal well with how I felt about this football player friend. And I made things so uncomfortable for him that he just couldn't be friends with me anymore. I mean, I drove him away, and I regret that to this day. I just couldn't handle it. He was such an amazing person, and I remember being heartbroken that, that he was gone and he just didn't want to be around me anymore. That was during my senior year in high school, and I was very fortunate that I ended up making some other friends who also, ironically, happened to be on the varsity football team. And I eventually told them the whole story, even about their fellow teammate. And even though they each had their own thoughts and opinions on homosexuality, none of them ever rejected me. They were some really great guys and good friends, and they looked after me and stood up for me even when I was being bullied. Sometimes I'd have lunch with them in the cafeteria and hang out with them at various school events. It was good times and some good memories. And I have to give my best friend and the 3 of them some pretty big credit, because they helped me find the strength in me to realize, mostly because they refused to believe otherwise, but that I could be whoever and whatever I wanted to be, that my sexuality didn't define me, that I being gay was merely a fraction of who I was, and not only what I was. And when I eventually went on to college, I was so much more content and confident and happy and secure in who I was. They say that you don't come out only once, and I strongly believe that's true. You come out again and again. When the time and place is right, we let others around us know the real us, but each time it gets a little easier. And even though it's been 30 plus years, it's still painful, a lot of it. And I look back and I think of all the stupid stuff I did, and much better ways that I could have handled it, or situations that I could have gotten myself killed. But somehow, amazingly, I didn't. But I'm here to tell a story now. If I had to offer any advice, I would say what I've always said. You just do you. Meaning, focus on being who you are and becoming the best you that you can become, because that's all you can do. You can't control others. As for the bullying, our thoughts, our feelings, and emotions, this might sound harsh, but it's true. Our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions are a series of chemical and electrical impulses within us, inside of us. No one can make us do or feel or think anything unless we allow it. Our happiness or sadness does not come from other people. Those people simply represent a symbol that we accept as a trigger that for some reason allows us to feel one way or another. It's no one else's fault if we're hurt or let down or happy or in love, simply because someone else didn't live up to our expectations of what we felt they should have done or felt. Feelings come from within us. We create them, no one else. And that's actually a good thing, because our thoughts and our words create our reality. So stay strong, be yourself. Don't be afraid to do what makes you happy. Life is good, and it only gets better if you let it. And we can have it all. And as for the ones we love, our parents, our friends, it takes time to process when your son or daughter comes out. These parents may have gone your whole life with ideas in their heads of what your life is going to be like. Married, children, the American dream. It takes some time, some more than others, and some react better than others. Sometimes they may not react in the most supportive of ways. But when you come out, do it in your own time, when you're ready. Not because you think you have to, not because someone else says you have to, but do it in your own time when your heart says you're ready, because you got to make sure that you're in a safe place, and choose to tell people that you can trust. People that are going to be there and are going to support you. And if you don't have anyone like that, there are definitely resources, people you can talk to about it that won't judge you for it. If you need help finding them, respond and hit me up. I'll help find them for you. We're all in it together. So take care, guys. Stay strong, and I love you all. Bye-bye.